Same man who kept receipts for gas cans and once drove all the way back to town to resign a document because the notary wrote the wrong zip code. I called my lawyer, Courtney, and she groaned the second I told her the name. They're trying to create implied historical consent, she said. It's weak, but judges sometimes buy this crap if they think it shows pattern of use. Did he actually talk to your dad? No, I said he was terrified of him. He used to mow his lawn the day after my dad did, just so he wouldn't get called out for sloppiness. That night, I decided it was time to stop just responding. It was time to go public. I had started filming things for documentation, the fence construction, the property surveys, the motion sensor logs, but I hadn't shared any of it. Not yet. So, I dug into my laptop, edited together the first 4-minute video, and posted it on YouTube under the title HOA fenced off my land. I have the maps. They have a clipboard. I kept it simple. I walked through my house down to the fence and showed the exact GPS data. I showed the deed. I showed the orchard. Then I played the voicemail from Karen with her smug little pitch about conditional access for a monthly maintenance fee. I overlaid the words extortion. You tell me. I didn't expect much, but by morning the video had been shared to 3 local Facebook groups and someone on Reddit reposted it to RHA Fails. By the next afternoon, the views hit 37,000. I started getting emails, some from people I didn't know, strangers across the country, saying they'd been bullied by their HOAs, too. Others were local. One came from a man named Dean Holloway who used to sit on the Mountain Crest HOA board. Michael, I'm sorry. I resigned last year because I couldn't stomach what they were doing. Karen forged a board vote. That land grab was never authorized. He offered to give a statement. My lawyer scheduled him in for deposition. Meanwhile, the HOA wasn't done. That same day, I spotted a van pull up near the new fence, outstepped a man in a tucked polo and khakis. He had a drone. I watched from the porch as he launched it, then started filming my land, my orchard, my solar rig, even my back windows. I walked right up to him and asked if he was with the HOA. No comment, he said, turning his camera away. I took a picture of his license plate. Then I took out my phone and opened the motion sensor app. Sure enough, the internal sensors on the fence had recorded movement late the previous night. Someone had leaned a ladder over it. Not from my side. I sent everything to Courtney. Later that week, Ellis, my surveyor, called me. He'd pulled aerial images of the property from the Army's historical Crafty archive where some of my father's early land use applications had been submitted. He found high-resolution aerials dated back to 1982 showing the same orchard and same shed. Proof that those structures predated any HOA existence. Courtney's eyes lit up like a bonfire when I showed her. They're done, she said. We'll file, but be ready. They'll push back. They'll try anything. She was right because the next morning I got a knock at my door. And standing there wasn't a stranger. It was Elvin Talbot holding a gift basket and looking like he'd swallowed a gallon of guilt. Mike, he said, I think I made a mistake and I need to tell you what really happened. Elvin stood there like a man who just realized he bet against the wrong horse. He held the wicker basket like it was a peace treaty. Wrapped in cellophane filled with locally made jams, a dusty bottle of white wine, and what looked suspiciously like expired cheddar, his face was pale, like he'd aged a decade since I last saw him. I let him squirm for a full 10 seconds before speaking. You here to explain why you signed a lie? I asked, leaning against the door frame. He flinched. Karen said it wouldn't matter, that it was just a formality. She said no one would look too closely. Did she also say how much it had cost to buy your memory? His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. He looked like he wanted to evaporate. I didn't take cash, he said quickly. She had the HOA pay for my roof repairs through a discretionary fund. She called it a maintenance incentive. I didn't think my father's name deserved better than to be used in a forged land heist. He didn't answer, just stared at his shoes and muttered something about doing the right thing now. I told him to go sit on the porch. Then I called Courtney. She picked up before the first ring finished. We have a confession, I said. And he brought cheese. She told me to record everything. I did. Sat him down, turned my phone on, and let him talk. He laid it out. Karen approached him a month prior, pitched the story about my father giving up part of the land back in the 9s, asked him to sign a pre-written statement, claimed it would smooth things over with county inspectors, promised HOA would make it worth his while. He signed it. A week later, a contractor showed up and fixed his leaking roof, paid directly by the HOA. I sent the video to Courtney, who nearly screamed from delight. That evening, she filed an emergency motion to include the confession in the discovery packet. The judge approved it. Things were tilting, and just in time, too, because that morning I got a letter from the court. The judge had granted a preliminary injunction against the HOA. They were barred from enforcing access restrictions, stepping onto my land, or claiming jurisdiction over the fenced area. Any further action would be contempt of court. It was a small win, but a win. Meanwhile, my video channel, War for 68 Feet, was blowing up. After the first viral hit, I kept uploading updates. I documented my walks around the perimeter. I showed Elvin's confession, blurred his face for now, read parts of the deed out loud, and even posted a breakdown of the historical aerial imagery. People were eating it up. A retired surveyor from Arizona emailed me asking if I needed another expert witness. A TikToker from Idaho made a meme with my shed and the caption, "Ha wants this shed? Shed says no." It got over 200,000 likes. The media picked it up next. Local NBC affiliates sent a reporter to do a driveway interview. I showed her where the original property stakes were, pointed out the solar array that was now communal grounds, according to Karen's warped logic. She shook her head and said it felt like something out of a legal thriller. Feels more like a sitcom written by people who hate veterans. I said on camera. That quote ended up in the evening news. Karen, to her credit, stayed quiet. Her silence was loud. But the HOA wasn't done trying. 2 days later, one of my sensors pinged just after midnight. Motion. Eastern fence line. I opened the feed. There they were. 2 HOA board members. Flashlights in hand, ducking into the orchard like raccoons in polos. One of them had a clipboard, the other a pair of wire cutters. I hit record. I watched as they reached the back of the shed and tried to access the utility panel that connected to my solar inverter. I didn't call the sheriff. I called Courtney. She told me to wait 15 minutes, then call. Let them commit, she said. Make it impossible to argue intent. So, I watched the feed, heart pounding, while those 2 geniuses fumbled with the panel. At exactly 15 minutes, I called the sheriff's non-emergency line and reported attempted tampering and trespass with real-time camera footage and motion logs. They showed up 20 minutes later and caught the 2 of them still inside the orchard trying to explain that they were conducting routine inspection of public green space. The deputies weren't impressed. Neither was the judge the next morning when Courtney submitted the footage and motion logs as a supplement to our case file. We weren't just dealing with overreach anymore. We were dealing with premeditated sabotage. And that changed everything. The courtroom smelled like old wood, dried out paper, and slow justice. We sat on the left, facing the bench, me, Courtney, and Ellis with his survey notes. On the right sat Karen Tudor, decked out in a charcoal pantsuit, 2 sizes too authoritative. Next to a grim, balding man, introduced as counsel for Mountain Crest, HOA. I didn't catch his name. I just mentally labeled him scowl number 2. The judge, gray-bearded, thick glasses, and clearly in no mood for HOA drama, called the room to order. Courtney opened with fire. She laid out the GIS records, the original deed, aerial imagery going back to the Reagan era, and the GPS overlays Ellis and I had mapped. She introduced the surveyor's report, the footage from my security system, and most importantly, the signed and recorded confession from Elvin Talbot. Your Honor, she said, holding up a hard copy. We have evidence not only of trespass and misrepresentation, but of a coordinated fraudulent effort to illegally absorb private property into a third-party organization's jurisdiction without consent, without process, and without shame. Karen's lawyer objected. Something about tone. The judge waved it off. Then Karen's team went on the defensive. They tried spinning the whole situation as a misunderstanding of shared land use, citing a supposed precedent set by a 1997 advisory memo about easement paths. They even called up a so-called expert to argue that my shed may have originally been placed over an informal public trail. The man hadn't even visited my land. Then they tried the Elvin angle, claimed that the previous owner, my father, had expressed openness to community partnership. Courtney rose like thunderclouds behind a podium. We have sworn testimony that this statement was falsified and that the HOA paid for that witness's roof repair within 72 hours of receiving the signed document. Karen stared straight ahead. Her jawline twitched once, maybe twice, but I could see it, the unraveling. And then came the drone footage. See, a few weeks b. I came back home on a Thursday afternoon, just after 4 days in Durango. My sister had undergone a minor but nerve-wracking surgery, and I stayed longer than expected to help her settle. I pulled off the gravel road that curved along the base of my land, past the weather-worn fence posts my father set in the early 70s. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the plateau, and the air smelled like juniper and faint wood smoke. As I rounded the final bend and my house came into view, something struck me as off. I slowed the truck to a crawl. My house stood where it always did, solid, proud, its wraparound porch looking out over the valley. But something was wrong with the back view. Something new stood where nothing should have been. At first, I thought I was seeing some kind of delivery staging, or maybe some kids prank fencing, but as I stepped out and walked toward it, the reality hit me with the same cold clarity as a snapped rifle bolt. A wooden privacy fence, tall, fresh, and utterly out of place, had been erected across my property. Not on the edge, not at a border, through it. It stood nearly 40 feet from my back porch, stretching from one end of my lot to the other, cutting straight through the orchard. My orchard. I didn't move for a good minute, just stood there staring. The warm wind stirred the pine trees as if whispering, "You see it, too." I finally walked up to the fence. The boards were new with fresh-smelling cedar, still leaching sap, bolted tightly, professionally installed. There was a laminated sign screwed into the middle slat. South Mountain Community Grounds, private access only, property of HOA. I laughed. Out loud, not because it was funny, but because my brain needed a place to hide. The sign stood right in front of my solar array, and behind that, I could just barely glimpse the corner of my tool shed. My father had built that shed when I was a teenager. We poured the foundation together with his army buddy from El Paso. I marched back to the house, my pulse somewhere between stunned and boiling. First thing I did was grab my old survey map from the desk drawer. Dated, stamped, and notarized. Same one my dad used when he had the property logged back in the day. Then I checked the land registry website. No record of changes, no boundary disputes filed, nothing. My property was still listed at 6 acres, bounded north and west by BLM scrubland and east and south by the Mountain Crest Development, the HOA that always kept a polite but smug distance until now. Apparently, I tried calling the number listed. For the Mountain Crest HOA. Got voicemail. I left a calm message. Then I called again and again. By the third attempt, my tone had dropped by about 20 degrees and gained a few exploitives. That night, I sat on the back porch, drinking cold black coffee and staring at a fence that should not exist. The next morning, I found a thick manila envelope in my mailbox. No postage, just dropped in by hand. The logo on the corner read Mountain Crest HOA, inside was a typed notice. It began with "Dear Adjacent Landholder" and went on to say that following a recent reassessment of disputed boundaries, the HOA had voted to reclassify a portion of land previously considered ambiguous as protected communal green space belonging to the HOA under Article 6, Section 3 of their bylaws. It further claimed that the land behind the new fence had been subject to informal shared usage for decades and that their new mapping clarified and reaffirmed the community's access rights. I read the letter twice, then a third time. Then I took a deep breath, folded it back up, and walked out into my orchard. My orchard. And stared through the gaps in the slats at my shed, my panels, and my peach trees. They'd fenced off nearly half an acre of my land, and they were claiming it as their own. I don't remember walking back to the house, but I do remember how calm my hands were as I pulled out the topographic overlays and started marking the exact position of the new fence using GPS from my handheld unit. I still had all my old surveying tools. After all, I used to do this professionally for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I wasn't scared, not yet. But I felt a weight settle in my chest, like a boot pressing just hard enough to let you know the fight was coming. And it wasn't going to be clean. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept pacing from window to window like some damn coyote, watching the fence as if it might sprout legs and crawl deeper into my land. At sunrise, I was already in my truck, headed straight for the Lotta County Assessor's office. My hands were steady, but my mind was already 10 moves ahead. I'd served long enough to know you don't face a fortified position with raw emotion. You bring data, precision, and a contingency plan. The clerk behind the counter looked to be about 19 and still had a cast from what I assumed was a ski accident. I handed her a copy of my land deed and asked politely if there had been any updates to my parcel boundaries. She tapped at her keyboard for a moment, then frowned. No recent filings, she said. No updates, no disputes, no notifications, nothing. Flagged for reassessment. I asked her to double-check. She printed me the GIS overlay from the county records. My property was unchanged, 6 full acres, fully independent and not within HOA jurisdiction. I knew that, of course, but I wanted the paper in hand. Back at home, I took things up a notch. I called in a favor from an old contact, a licensed private land surveyor named Ellis Freeman, who used to work alongside me during my Corps of Engineers days. Within 48 hours, he was on site with his gear. Theodolite and GPS rigs humming like old friends. Ellis worked methodically. He even pulled the old brass property markers from beneath the underbrush to triple confirm the historical lines. When he was done, he walked back up to the house, his boots covered in burrs, and dropped his hat on the table like a man laying down a verdict. That fence, he said, is planted 68 foot inside your legal property line. The bastards didn't even try to match the corners. It's a joke. He handed me his full report complete with elevation data, GPS readings, and overlay schematics. That night, I finally activated my countermeasures. Months ago, I had installed a network of low-profile motion and vibration sensors along key edges of my land, mostly out of old military habit. I'd never had a reason to use them until now. I updated their range to track any movement near or on the new fence. I also attached 2 GPS tags, hidden magnets latched to the inside cross beams. Not only would I know if someone tried to move the fence, I'd know where it went and when. The next move was legal. I walked into the sheriff's office, laid out my deed, Ellis's survey, the GIS printout, and even photos of the brass corner stakes. The deputy behind the counter name tag said Ramirez flipped through it with a puzzled look. "Have you tried contacting the HOA board directly?" he asked. "Tried?" I said. "They're avoiding me." This letter was the only thing they had the guts to leave in person. He read the printed HOA letter I'd brought, his brow furrowing deeper as he went. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. Drayton. Looks like a civil issue. We can't intervene unless there's criminal trespass or property damage. I've got a shed, a solar rig, and fruit trees behind that fence. If that's not property damage, it's coming close." He shrugged with professional neutrality, but he did hand me a complaint form and suggested I file for a restraining order if the HOA tried anything else. As I walked out, my phone pinged. New voicemail from a blocked number. It was a woman's voice, smug, condescending. "Mr. Drayton, this is Karen Tudor, president of the Mountain Crest HOA. We understand you may be confused about the new zoning changes. For your convenience, we're offering you the opportunity to join our HOA as an associate member. If you agree, we can arrange conditional access to the parcel behind the fence for a small monthly maintenance fee, of course. Please respond within 5 business days. We'd hate to see this matter escalate unnecessarily." I stared at the screen, almost laughing. They were trying to charge me rent for my own Gotham land. I saved the voicemail. Then I copied it. Then I backed it up to 2 drives in a cloud folder labeled Karen's lawsuit fuel. That night, as the wind picked up over the valley, my phone vibrated again. This time it was from the security system. Motion detected. Fence area. I pulled up the app. There they were. 2 men in HOA polos walking along the interior of the fence line with clipboards taking photos. They didn't know I could see them. I let the camera record and I smiled. They'd built a wall to keep me out. But I had just stepped into the heart of their scheme. And I wasn't alone anymore. I didn't expect the HOA to back off. Not after the voicemail Karen left me. Not after I caught her clipboard cronies sniffing around my orchard like they owned the place. But what I didn't expect was the little twist they threw in next. A wrinkle so cheap and obvious it almost made me laugh. Almost. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I got the notice. Hand delivered again. No return address. Just slipped into my mailbox like some kind of coward's calling card. This time it wasn't a letter. It was a statement of witness signed and notarized from a neighbor I hadn't seen in years, Elvin Talbot. Now, Elvin wasn't exactly known for his wit or spine. Retired pipe fitter, mostly kept to himself. But here he was claiming under oath that to the best of his recollection, my father had told him back in 1994 that part of the southern parcel was no longer necessary and could eventually be ceded to the Mountain Crest community for environmental protection. I read that line 3 times before I put the paper down and just stared at the ceiling like it might start bleeding lies. My father, the